Khamzat Chimaev versus Sean Strickland takes place at UFC 328. And guys, we haven't seen this type of animosity and the type of buildup that will happen during fight week is going to be just nothing short of chaos. And, I just can't wait for that moment when they close the cage behind them and it's just Strickland and Chimaev and all the hate and all the buildup over the years surrounding, most importantly, the sparring history at Xtreme Couture between these two. Just the rumors that Chimaev was just taking Strickland down and beating him up and submitting him time and time and time again. And, what does that mean? What does the sparring history mean? It doesn't mean is it already over? I just don't think it's that simple. I think there's a lot more to this fight than just the rumors about their sparring history. Now Strickland has, talked about sensitive topics about Chimaev. Something I've never seen anybody do to Chimaev is poke the bear. Talk about his political stances and his affiliations with the leadership in Chechnya. Stuff I won't get too deep into, but it's just I haven't seen this type of deep animosity since Conor McGregor versus Khabib, and I don't know. We've been kind of waiting for this type of moment for a long time, so I'm just glad it's here. And what does the fight mean? What does the fight mean? Now, Chimaev is coming off of a dominant win over Du Plessis to take crown as the UFC middleweight champion, and that fight was dominant, across the scorecard, 50-44, and over 20 minutes of control time. Now, was it dominant in terms of damage? Not exactly, but in terms of wrestling skills, showing that your dominance in wrestling, Chimaev had a perfect night that night. And now Strickland is coming off of one of his greatest performances in his career, a statement that he made against Anthony Hernandez, winning by TKO and showing that he has real takedown defense, and it's just the type of performance that we needed to build this fight up. Now there's going to be a lot of bad blood, it's going to be a lot of animosity, but let's look at the styles. This fight is, it's great because we're looking at two different styles and it could get really interesting. Now, let's take a look at Strickland. Strickland fights with that Philly shell. He has elite striking, elite, that jab is elite, that pinpoint accurate jab, and he has this style where he accumulates damage over the rounds. He's not a one knockout finisher. He's not someone who poses a lot of power in his punches, but he's someone who accumulates damage over time, accumulates strikes. He has high significant strikes over rounds. And one interesting fact about Strickland, and he has great takedown defense. Now, when you look at Chimaev has great chain wrestling. So this is going to be interesting. Oh, I can't wait. This is going to be interesting. Now, Chimaev has evolved over the years. Now, we remember the struggles he had against Gilbert Burns, against Usman. The biggest struggle he had in those two fights was that we saw that he was hittable when he entered range, right? And that was evident. Besides his cardio, I think that was one of the biggest things that everyone saw is that Chimaev is very hittable when he enters that range, right? And, that is an aspect that, Strickland can take advantage of. And, even though another aspect we could look at is Strickland's takedown defense was great against Hernandez, but Hernandez is not Chimaev. It's a huge distinction in wrestling. So this fight out is just stylistically going to be very interesting, and I can't wait for that. Now, there are some key questions that we can ask and key questions that will get answered in this fight. And, I think the number one question everyone is asking is, can Chimaev take Strickland down consistently over 25 minutes? Now, he was able to do that against Du Plessis, as we all saw, but Strickland is not Du Plessis on the ground. As we've seen, as he's proven lately, Strickland has an ability to get up from the ground. Now, this is something that Khamzat has admitted, that before he fought Du Plessis, he admitted that Du Plessis would be a lot easier of a fight than Strickland, just because that Strickland has the ability to get up, whereas the gap in wrestling between Du Plessis and Chimaev was just enormous, and Du Plessis just couldn't make up for that, as we all saw. I think that if Du Plessis and Chimaev fought, Chimaev would beat him 100 times out of 100. Maybe 99 if Du Plessis got lucky, but there just wasn't any avenue of success for Du Plessis, and it's a lot different for Strickland, just because he has that ability to get up. Now, the difference is that since Strickland has the ability to get up, Chimaev can't just grind and spend top to position comfortably and not go for the finish here. He has to go for finishes early. or else he runs the risk of this momentum changing, in the middle towards the end of the fight, right? Because a lot of people aren't giving Strickland a chance in this fight. That's a lot of people are saying this is a 100% easy win for Chimaev. They saw how Chimaev performed in his last fight against Duplessis and just saw the dominance and saying, who is beating this guy? And they saying nobody has a chance against him. Now, I don't. I'm not angry at that take. He had a great performance, but I think that this is not 100% Chimaev's fight. I don't think it's 50-50 either. I think Chimaev has the edge. I'm seeing this more as like an 80-20, but there are avenues for Strickland to win, right? So, as we mentioned earlier, Chimaev has a tendency when he enters into range, his striking defense isn't great, and that's where Strickland's jab is going to be money, right? So if Chimaev gets into striking range often, it's not going to be good for him. He has to try to get him out early. And, Strickland has a path to win. He has a path to win, and it's more realistic than people are giving him a chance to win. But what do I think will happen in this fight? What's my prediction in this fight? I think that early on, Chimaev will take him down, and Strickland will get up. And I think Strickland will get up, and Strickland will build confidence in his get up. And that's where he's going to, there's going to be a mistake in terms of I think Strickland will get up easily, and he's going to get a little cocky, get a little sloppy in his get up. And I think Chimaev will adjust and hunt submissions, instead of just grinding him and spending top control and, back control. I think that Chimaev will hunt for a finish in these transitions when Strickland is getting up. And I think his team knows. I think he knows in preparation. I think his team is smart enough to know. Hopefully they are, that they have to work on submissions early on. I think this is a completely different fight than Duplessis, and that I think Chimaev knows that. And I think we're underrating Chimaev's IQ, fight IQ. And I truly believe, late second round that Chimaev will get the finish. I am predicting a head and arm triangle, as they're transitioning, as Strickland is getting up from a takedown, and I just think night's over. I think Chimaev's wrestling, the gap in wrestling between Chimaev and the rest of these middleweight contenders is just too large, in my opinion, at this point in his game. And I think Chimaev will beat all of these guys unless someone has the wrestling mechanics close to what he has, and nobody right now in the middleweight division has that. So I think Chimaev late second round submission. That's my prediction. That's what I think will happen. But I'm very interested to know what the rest of you guys think. Drop below in the comments what you guys think of this fight. Am I wrong? And do you think that the gym sparring in the gym sessions that they had, the rumors, you think that's a good indicator of what will happen, or do you think it's going to be a completely different fight at UFC 328? And I'm curious to know that. Until next time, guys, I'm out, and see you guys next time.